Well, hello everyone. Great to have you back on one of these webinars. We've been doing a few BizTalk Migrator webinars lately, and I'm really excited about this one. This is, I think, the best one so far. So not to underplay it or anything. We're really looking forward to the content we've got for you today. So what we're going to do today is we're really going to start drilling into the code base and the repos, because it's an open source project. So the idea of that is that you can make contributions as well as everyone else. So if there's a feature that's missing, or if there's a bug, or even if you just want to propose a new feature, then that's the whole point of it being an open source project, is your contributions as well that matter, not just you're not just being given something on a plate. It's something that we can all participate in. So with that, let's move on and say, okay, as you know, you've been to these before. I'm Andrew Rivers. I'm the director of 345 Technology, and we specialize in all things data, including integration, which is moving data around, data platforms, storing data, and data analytics. And I'm joined by Dan Probert, who is CTO of Affinis, and Affinis are the specialist in integration on the Microsoft platform. And as you all know, Dan is the world leader in Logic Apps. So we've got a great presenting team and some really good content to bring you. Now, in this series, the first thing we did was we had a look at the first view. Then we unpacked the tool a bit more, and we looked at a bit more about what the tool generates, what the components that are generated are. And what we're doing now is we're going to run through the code base and the repos and just show you where everything is, and a little bit of why it is as well. Because there's no point in just giving you a bit of code and saying there's some code. It's really good to get that content on it. So what we're actually going to do is, in today's webinar, we're going to run through the repos and how they all fit together. We're then going to demonstrate how to build and debug the solution, and then we'll take you through how you can make some of your own improvements, because that's the key part. And so I'll do the first part, and then I'll hand over to Dan, and he'll do the difficult part, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Now, I have apologies for the first webinar. So I did forget to enable Q&A on the first one. It's one of those things you only do once. So please do put things in the Q&A as they come up, and we'll try and have a look at those as we get through, as we're going through. But if we don't manage to answer them as we're going through, then we'll get round to them at the end. So please do put things in the Q&A. So there we go. So where are we? So far we've really looked at the BizTalk Migrator in the context of what it does, and just as importantly, what it produces. In other words, what the Azure app looks like. The process for migrating, what the Azure app looks like. Now the initial release, the BizTalk Migrator, as you've no doubt seen, we've got FTP, we've got file adapters, we've got pass-through messaging, we've got XML messaging. So that does actually cover quite a lot of BizTalk apps, but it's barely scratched the surface. We've got very small amount of orchestration coverage. So really, what like I was saying before, your contributions are valuable in improving the open source project, because together, if we all get involved, we can have something that is going to be able to do more and more and migrate more and more BizTalk solutions ever better. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the design and the code, so that you'll be able to understand how it's first of all the design intent, but then also how it all fits together, so you can debug it, improve it, make fixes, all that sort of thing. So let me start really with some of the design goals for BizTalk Migrator. So obviously, the first design goal is that we convert a BizTalk application into the Azure Integration Services stack. So instead of our integration application running on BizTalk, an equivalent app is then running in Azure. So that is the number one design goal. But that ultimately, there are a limited number of BizTalk applications in the world. So wouldn't it be great in the future that we could actually use this same underlying technology to convert from other integration technologies as well? So, for example, let's say, without picking on anyone particularly, but IBM WebSphere, MuleSoft, perhaps even TIBCO, even Dell Boomi, and any of those other ones. Potentially in the future, we could, given the fact that what we're producing, the artifacts for an integration application, are going to be universal to all integration applications. You've still got to do the same thing. You've got to connect to APIs, or people have got to be able to send messages in. You've got to be able to transform them, send them out. Those things are, there are a finite number of universal integration things. So it'd be great to convert other technologies. So what this tool's also done is it's been delivered as a command line interface. But wouldn't it be great in the future if there were other ways of delivering it? So maybe you could build it into a website so that people could upload their BizTalk applications and download an Azure application. Maybe, I don't know, but future support for other types of runners other than just a CLI. And with it being an open source project, it's got to be extensible. It's got to be easy for other contributors. It's going to be easy for the contributors to add functionality and to be able to make little units of code that they can plug in. And the final thing is that we know that Logic Apps as a whole is in a period of transition at the moment, because you've got the old Logic Apps, the original Logic Apps, and that's all being rebuilt to run on the functions framework. And then when it's on the functions framework, maybe there'll be some further refinements on there. Maybe there'll be an on-premises version as well as a cloud version. So even though at the moment we only support one flavor of Logic Apps, one flavor of AIS, maybe in the future there'll be other flavors. Maybe there'll be maybe we'll need to support different versions of Service Bus. Maybe we'll need to support Event Grid in a different way. Who knows? But let's leave the door open to support other flavors in the future. Now, what we also kind of showed last time was, we've shown this kind of slide quite a lot. It's a very important view of the functional way in which the tool works. In that we have a kind of a linear process of discover, parse, analyze, report, convert, verify, and and we've talked in the past about what each of these stages is. But what I'm actually going to focus on now is some of the subtleties of this slide that maybe we didn't talk about too much, because that's going to be very important when we talk about the code. So so as you see in the top left, you've got this thing here where you've got the configuration, as in you've got command line arguments and configuration files maybe, and then all the way along you've got these up and down arrows where we're talking to a BizTalk application migration in-memory object model. So each of these stages, the thing that ties them together is and it makes perfect sense if you think about it, but you've effectively got a pipeline, but that pipeline is interacting with an object model, so that when we discover things, they get, the fact that we've discovered components in an MSI, in a BizTalk MSI, they get added to the model. Then when we parse them, we break all those components down, and we actually decode the bindings file. We decode the BizTalk assemblies, and so and build up a more detailed object model with all the BizTalk application in it. And then when we analyze the model, we're then effectively building up what the target application looks like. So we're building an in-memory object model of the target application. The report really just reads that object model and renders it into HTML. The convert then uses that object model to produce the artifacts, and then verify is where you deploy that into your Azure subscription. So and so that is very much, the in-memory object model is a key feature. But then we also look underneath each of these phases. You've got these boxes, BizTalk app MSI orchestrations. The idea is that these are pluggable components. So the whole solution works by you being able to write pluggable components that simply slot in to all these different stages. And so that's the important thing. So what I'll do next is really talk about what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the GitHub repos. But before we actually go into GitHub, I'm going to actually just describe them in terms of how they all fit together and why there are 5 repos and not 1. And it comes back a lot of it to that design intent. So let's say you have got on the left-hand side of this diagram, you've got your BizTalk app that you want to migrate, and on the right-hand side, there's the integration app in Azure that you want out of this. And in the middle, we've just got this big blob, which is the Azure integration migration. So one of the things you'll notice from the apps is that everything is prefixed with AIM, and that's because that stands for Azure Integration Migration. And I've actually been fortunate enough to have some long conversations with the people that actually did the design of this. So I've got quite a good handle on how this fits together. Azure Integration Migration is why everything's prefixed with AIM, and then the GitHub repos corresponds to the packages that make up this tool. So the key thing here is that the tool is built of separate packages that together compose a working application, and the repos correspond to the different packages. So the first thing we have is the core runner. So that diagram we just looked at with the different stages, that's all governed by the core runner, and that's in the repo AIM core, and that actually is the thing that that actually harvests all the different plugins, divides them into the different stages of discover, analyze, parse, report, etc., and then runs them. So that's what that runner does. And each of those stages is effectively implemented as an interface that's defined in the core runner, and then when you create components, you implement those interfaces. So if you've got something that is going to parse a particular BizTalk artifact, you'd implement the iParse interface, for example, and then at runtime, the core runner actually looks on disk at, it's given a folder to look for assemblies in. It reflects over those assemblies and finds everything that fits those interfaces, puts them into memory, divides them between the different stages, then orders each stage by priority, and then executes them. And that's what the core runner does. So it's a really, really important bit that sits at the core. Now, in addition to this, we've got the AIM tool. So the core runner, oops, that just got a little bit overexcited then. The core runner is where the command line runs. So, I said in the past that we want to be able to support different, maybe you could deliver this as a web app, maybe you could deliver this as another in another format. But so far this has been delivered just as a command line interface. So that's the entry point into the application. But AIM core is the actual meat of the app that actually runs. Now, what we're doing is we're building up an in-memory model of an integration app in Azure. So that model is actually the AIM model, and so when we actually come to do a conversion, what we have is everything that is BizTalk specific is in the AIM BizTalk package. So parsing a BizTalk application, decoding that, the rules for converting a BizTalk application into an Azure application, those are all in the AIM BizTalk repo. And then once we've built up that model, once we've built up a model of what an integration app looks like in Azure, we actually don't need to refer to the BizTalk app anymore, because what we then do is we then need to run a conversion on that. And what we have is we have templates and configuration that effectively generate that application. So the templates are in AIM Azure, and so you combine the model with a template that produces an artifact, and that is what is used to deploy your AIS application. And the artifacts that are generated, typically speaking, they are either going to be ARM templates to deploy things like logic apps, or they're going to be PowerShell scripts to do deployments. And most of the PowerShell scripts underneath the bonnet will be using the Azure CLI. So those all combine together to give you a set of templates, a set of artifacts that you can then run a PowerShell script over, or put into your DevOps process and produce the AIS application. Now, let's say if you want, this really is just looking to some of the future extensibility that we might want to do. So let's say you wanted to make a wizard. You could create a library called aim wizard, and that would run on top of the core runner instead of aim tool. Or if you wanted to do a web interface, so you could make your own packages to deliver that as a different form factor. Similarly, if you wanted to make a performance optimized version of your application, so at the moment this application is kind of functionally optimized. It's very, very decoupled, highly decoupled. But what that means is that you might not be running the most performance optimized. So if you could make another performance optimized version, you could make an industry specific version, and that would be by changing the templates mostly. Now, and also if you wanted to, migrate from a different integration technology, you could basically replace the AIM BizTalk package with a AIM Mule package or an AIM Boomi package, and the rest of the tool will stay the same because you could simply swap those out. So that's kind of how the whole thing fits together and the design intent on this. And obviously one of the other things that we've got that's actually quite an interesting prospect is that if you wanted to directly author an Azure application, you could actually produce a modeler that populated that model directly, and then you could just run the conversion rules to generate your Azure app. So there's a lot of possibilities in here. It's pretty foundational at the moment, but the vision is actually quite big in terms of what could be done in the future. Now, exactly how far and how fast we're going to get is down to a combination of Microsoft and the open source community, and how fast both of those parties can really move on this. So what we're going to talk now about is about how you might extend the BizTalk Migrator. So there are a couple of main possibilities with what you might want to do. So I'm not going to go too much into detail on this because Dan's going to talk about this a little bit later. But at the moment, the main places you're going to make contributions are in the AIM tool repo, because that is where the documentation is, that's where the user guide is, and so because that is effectively the entry point, that's the program you're actually running, that's where the documentation sits. And chances are that the first thing you're going to want to do is either to raise an issue, either a feature request or a bug, or you're going to maybe want to look at or improve the documentation. So your first stop will probably be the AIM tool repository. Now the next place you might be looking, if you wanted to actually fix something, chances are that you might be looking at the AIM BizTalk, because that's where all the BizTalk specific things are. That's where the stage runners are. That's where the analysis rules are. That's where the conversion rules are, and also the test scenarios. So maybe you wanted to make a new test scenario and contribute that. That would go in the AIM BizTalk repository. Similarly, if there's an error in one of the folders, then sorry, not one of the folders. If there's an error in one of the templates, if there's an error in one of the components that's been generated, then you might be looking at the AIM Azure repo, and because that's where the definitions for the Azure artifacts are. That's where the deployment scripts are, and those use Liquid. So they're templates. They're based in Liquid. So I don't know how many of you run e-commerce shops on Shopify, but Liquid is effectively a templating engine that came out of Shopify and then got open sourced, and those are and that gives you the ability to effectively merge JSON data with a template and produce a text artifact. So under the bonnet, that's what generates all the code. Okay, so what we're going to do now is do a bit of a demo. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just trying to get my next next window ready. Just bear with me one moment. It's I am just struggling to I'm just struggling to fight Teams at the same time as do the demo, but I think I've pretty much got it now. So let's just see if we've got that. So can you see those repos?
Yep, I can see them, Andrew.
That is great. Sorry, it's the producer thing on Teams has just gone crazy, and so it's not really been very helpful. Okay, so here's I've very helpfully starred all these repos for you because they sit in the Azure organization on GitHub, and as I said before, they're all prefixed with AIM. And so here they all are. Here's the 5 of them, but I've starred them so that they're easier to, so that they're easy for me to get to. So the reason why you might want to star them or something like that, or follow them, is because there are actually about 1,500 repos in the Azure organization. So yeah, there's quite a lot to wade through there. But these all start with AIM. So like I said, the first one is AIM core. And then there's the command line interface AIM tool. Then AIM model is where that in-memory object model, AIM BizTalk for the BizTalk specific artifacts, and then AIM Azure for the templates. So what I'm going to do first of all is to have a quick look at AIM tool. So obviously, if you wanted to make any changes to this, let's get rid of my fundraising icon. If you wanted to make any changes to this, then what you do is you just you copy that and you do a git clone, and then you could you could get that repo on your local machine. But what I want to draw your attention to in the AIM tool is that you've got this docs folder here, and the docs folder gives you the documentation on the BizTalk Migrator. So you've got obviously a bit of an introduction to it. Then there's a quick start guide, so this might be a really helpful place for you to look, where you've got obviously all the how you install, how you run the tool, all the command line switches, some example commands, and examples of the report, etc. So do have a look at the documentation, the quick start guide, and also on the AIM tool. That's where there are issues as well. So I see we've got a couple of closed issues at the moment. But if you found a bug, that's where you kind of create a new issue in this repo probably, and that's where you'd be looking. So just going around some more of those other repos, like say AIM BizTalk is really the next place what I'm going to focus on. And so within this repo, you've got the source, which is the where the meat of it is. There are obviously tests, but another interesting thing to look at here is the scenarios. Those are the test scenarios that are shipped with the tool, which are FTP pass-through, XML file processing with mapping, a simple orchestration using FTP, and an asynchronous request response solution that goes through an orchestration with a map in it. So again, if you had another scenario, that's where you'd add that. Now, just conscious of the fact that, just conscious of time really, so I'm now going to demonstrate debugging the application to you. So what I've done here is I've opened up the AIM BizTalk repo. I've cloned it, I've forked it and cloned it, and I've actually opened it in Visual Studio. And one of the things you'll see in here is when we had those stages. So for example, we had Discover. All the components for Discover are in one project, and then parse, so parsing a BizTalk application, that's another project, and then analyze, report, and convert, they're all in separate libraries within this repo. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you how easy it is to debug into the into this. So the first thing we do is get some commands. Now, what I've got here are some commands that I prepared earlier. So depending on whether you're going to actually run a full conversion or whether you're just going to run the report and assess it, the commands are slightly different. But if we're going to run a full migration, I'm going to run aim, which is which runs aim.exe, and then I'm going to pass it the debug flag to say that I want to debug it, and then migrate, which is the command to do the full migration. And these are the different command line switches that I'm going to pass to it. So this is the search pattern. So I'm going to have a search pattern for anything that I've got stage runners.dll, and that means that when the task runner, the core runner runs, it will look in a folder for any DLL that's got the name stage runners in it, and I'm going to point at this folder. The -f is the folder, defined folder, where those where it's going to look for those stage runners, and that's again pointing on my local machine. Then this is the MSI file I'm going to send to it, so I'm just going to send it the FTP pass through, and then that is the output folder, the unpack directory. So these -a are just arguments. So these are the component specific arguments. So I'm also going to pass it the unpack directory of where it's going to unpack the MSI, because as you know, an MSI is basically like a zip file, and within that has cab files, and they're basically zip files. And so you unzip a load of cab files, you unzip the cab files, and that gives you all the assemblies and the binding files and that sort of thing. And that needs to be unpacked onto disk. So that's the directory where that happens. Then I'll give it a working directory, -w. The -s is where it saves the state. So that object model gets serialized and dumped out to disk in the state in the state directory. That's that one. And then I can also give it a folder where I've got the templates. So again, if I'm making changes to the templates, I can force the tool to point to my local copy of those templates rather than the ones that are installed from Chocolatey. And then there's a couple of switches here, which is the save stage state, so that we save a copy of the state every different stage we move through. Then just to save state, I'm also setting the primary region to be UK South. That's my Azure region. The backup region, the secondary region, UK West. I've given it a dev as my deployment environment. I've got to give it a unique deployment ID just in case I get namespace collisions on the Azure artifacts. And I'm setting it to not abort, and that's the verbose flag. So quite a lot of switches on there. But if I effectively run that command line, what happens is I'm then invited to attach my debugger onto process, in this case 13204 aim. And so then I go into Visual Studio, and you'll all be familiar with this from debugging into BizTalk hosts. But I go debug, attached process, and then there at the top is aim.exe ID 13204. I attach to that, and the tool will now run, and it will run with the debugger attached. And what I've done here is I've set a breakpoint in this quite at the start of the folder. So the first component that runs is the MSI discoverer. It's the thing that discovers what's in your MSI. So again, I can then I can then step through that code, and I can look what's in the containers and find out what's actually happening. Obviously, I can all the stuff you expect from debugging. We're just running the tool now and getting working folders and all the different variables. We've got that, so you all know how to debug. I won't labour the point any further, but simply to say that it's really interesting taking the time to run this and step through it, because you actually see some interesting things about how it goes through. So for example, in the assembly discoverer, this is where we unpack all the assemblies and actually go through each assembly, and this is where the schemas are. That's where we find the maps, the transforms. that's where we're looking at the receive pipelines, the send pipelines, the orchestrations, all the compiled elements of what's a BizTalk application are actually being discovered there straight from the assemblies. And another time, if we've got time, it's really interesting to go through using ILSpy, get a BizTalk assembly and look at it and look at what's actually compiled in there, because you can see all the schemas, maps, pipelines, and orchestrations in your assembly. So let's just continue out of that. Obviously that application will just run and complete. And there we have it. There we have debugged the BizTalk Migrator through Visual Studio. So that was really all I was going to do on that for today. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Dan, who's going to then talk about some far more complicated stuff about how this stuff really works, now that I've glossed over the easy part. So get ready to share away as soon as you are ready, Dan.
I will indeed. Let me know and you can see what I'm sharing.
Yeah, we can see it. That's great.
Awesome. Okay. And just to say, one of your comments there about getting out ILSpy or .NET Reflector or something and looking at the BizTalk assemblies, I used to do that years ago. What's kind of funky is when you open up some of the actual Microsoft assemblies and look at, say, the source code for the XML disassembler pipeline component, and you realize how much is in there. It's unbelievable. It's like Alice down the rabbit hole. You keep going through, referenced assemblies again and again and again and again, looking at more and more code. There's a lot there. Anyway, thanks, Andrew. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about was how we work out what the code is doing. So I want to give a realistic example of saying, okay, well, let's say I've given an MSI and I've used, say, the scenario 1, which has got an FTP receive location in it. How can I work out how it parses that FTP receive location and outputs the FTP receive adapter in the converted and then in the conversion folder? So we'll have a look at that in the source code today. And where we're going with this is, once you understand how that works, you can start writing your own code. One of the things that Andrew had there, you saw that he was running the tool and passing in a folder where it looks for stage runners. And the idea of the tool, as we understand it, is that it is extensible. So you can add your own stage runners in. If you've written some stage runners, maybe you've got some analysis rules for a particular situation that you have with a customer, you can write your own stage runners and you drop that assembly into the correct folder. And when the tool runs, it will use your stage runners as well. It's very cool. Obviously you hope that Microsoft will develop most of the core functionality for this, and they'll handle, all the standard things. But if you've got a customer which had say a third-party adapter, and you're the only people that use that, and they've got hundreds of receive locations using it, then what you could do is write your own stage runner to handle that with your own rule, which might not be publicly available to other people, but you could do that. Obviously, being an open source project, if you think it's useful to other people, then you can, submit that and fork and raise a PR and commit to or merge your own changes. But let's start here. So at this point here, we've supplied an MSI, and there is an FTP receive location in there. So the discover and parse stage runners have unpacked the MSI and they've parsed it. And as part of that, they've built an initial model. And in that initial model, we placeholders for the application, the receive ports, and the receive locations. They won't have any details yet because we haven't parsed that. And then what happens is that there's an analysis stage runner called RP001, and that's looking for FTP receive locations. And when it finds them, it reads through the binding file and adds the details to the model. Those values in the model are then used with a YAML file. So I'm going to show all this, but there's a YAML file that is generated, but it's also a liquid file. And Andrew talked about this. The liquid is used to populate that YAML file with the values from the model, and we'll show that. And then we end up with a YAML file, and that YAML file points at the actual template we're going to use. So it's like a three-step process. So we run through and we build a model, then we use that model and a liquid template to build a YAML file, and then that YAML file describes how we are going to change the templates that are output at the other end. It makes more sense when I go through and do a demo. So we'll do a demo, making your own improvements. So we will come out of PowerPoint, hopefully. Now, Andrew showed you earlier the starting point generally is the AIM tool repo. We're going to be working with the AIM BizTalk and the AIM Azure repos. So the AIM BizTalk repo contains the source code for all the stage runners related to BizTalk and the analysis rules and things like that. And also it has the configuration to the YAML file. So down in here under source, we've got analysis rules inside here. And then we also have under config here, we have some liquid files that represent the YAML files that we're going to be building in the background. Yeah. And then AIM Azure contains all the resources. So everything that is output at the end is all inside this repo here. So under templates here, we have templates for, say, endpoints, and we go into here and we go to FTP and we go receive, and you will find in here all the deployment scripts and ARM templates and PowerShell files that you see in your conversion folder for the FTP receive adapter. And some of them are liquid files, yeah, because before it outputs them, it's going to insert things into those liquid files. So insert things like the name of the resource that we're deploying, or the name of the resource group it's going to be in, which is based upon the name of your application plus the unique deployment ID and whether you're in dev or prod and things like that. So we'll start with the rules. So if we come out to Visual Studio here, I've opened up the BizTalk project from the AIM BizTalk repo. And if we go to the Analyze project in here, you'll find that under conversion rules, we have a number of conversion rules here, and we're looking for the receive port one for FTP. So that's called RP001. You'll see there's a corresponding one here for the send port as well. So these are the ones that are supported so far. As Microsoft adds support for more adapters, I expect to see more rules in here. But again, you could write your own DLL with your own conversion rules in them and drop it in, and it will run those as well. You might have I might have a DP001. Well, that wouldn't follow the naming convention, but you know what I mean. We can write our own and drop them in. So this is the FTP one here for receive port. So it's coming through, and what it's doing is we've already got a model with the basic information from the parse stage. And what it's going to do is it's going to loop through all the applications and then loop through all the receive ports, and then for each receive port loop through all the receive locations, and then look for a receive location where the transport type is FTP. I don't know if you've gone through and looked at a binding file and trying to read it by hand, but the transport type inside the receive location identifies what your adapter is and the prefixed values, and the values come from the adapter bindings. But in this case here, it's FTP. So now we have FTP. What we're going to do is we're going to find the section in the model for this receive location. And if we haven't found it, we'll output an error. But if we do find it, we're going to update it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set a rating. So the rating there is what appears in the report. If you look in the report, you'll see 1 to 5 stars. And this one here, full conversion with fidelity loss, which is basically 4 stars. So that means, from what I understand, that it will work, but it doesn't support all the properties in BizTalk. And what you see then under the 4 stars is you should see a list of properties that aren't supported in AIS. So that's what that means. Not every property in the FTP adapter is supported. And we know that today. So that's what happens here. Then they're setting the type of exchange pattern, which means we're accepting a message here. Then the next interesting part here is where we're setting the adapter properties. So that is going down here to map adapter properties, and it lists the supported properties. So these are the ones that are supported in Azure. And what we're attempting to do is we're attempting to find those values in the binding file. So if they're not found, then we're outputting an error, and we're indicating that we don't have a value for it. But if we do find them, then we're inserting them into the model. So what we end up with here is the model, which you can see it's a JSON file, has all the values we need in here for this adapter. There's some other stuff going down here in terms of parsing, the adapter properties, like the representation type needs to be converted, whether it's binary or not. And that has to do with the fact that in in Logic Apps, the FTP connector just has a binary value has a Boolean value to indicate whether binary is supported or not, whereas in BizTalk, it's an enum. Right. One of the interesting things is the model that is generated in the background here. So I have a sample of a model here. Now this actually is the file model, so it's not the FTP one, but it's very similar. And what you can see is, oops, I moved outside of my. I appear to have frozen my VM. Give me a second to get back to it. All right, there we go. I tried to drag out, I thought I was dragging out of it. What I want to look for here is, let's see if we can find the file adapter. Oh, there's file receive ports. I want to find the file adapter. If I knew what it was called, there's a file send port. So it is probably further up the model in here. What I'm looking for is I want to show you. So here's a send port. I want to look for the properties. So here we are in the send port collection. So we're in the target model. So the source model here. This is what we've pulled out of the binding file. Yeah. And then further down in the model here will be all the things that we're outputting. So the target model. So we've got files. Maybe files a bad one to look for. What I'm trying to find is the section for the file adapter so that I can show that all the properties that we were reading out, here we go, migration target will be down in here. All the properties that we're reading out are just stored in here. So maybe I'll search for file adapter. That, nothing. All right, I should have done this earlier. All righty. Okay, I might leave this, but there's basically going to be a section of parameters in here which will be mapped. In that code I showed you earlier, the RP001, there'll be a series of parameters that we're mapping to. And this is where they get stored. And it's important to know that they're here because what happens then is in the liquid template for the YAML file, it's reading them from these sections. So I might try and find that later on. But go back to our code, that's what this is doing. So if you wanted to add support for a different adapter, you would just write another rule. So I might write an RP004 SFTP, God, I can't get that one out. SFTP receive port analyzer. I might write one of those. And that would, just be a copy of this. It would be looking for slightly different properties depending on what's supported and what we can, pull out of the binding file. But it would be very similar. And what that would do is that would then add the details for that receive port to the model. So now we've got things in the model. What happens next? Well, we have a series of YAML files here. So I'm now in the AIM BizTalk repo, and under config, I showed this earlier, there was a series of YAML files which are also liquid templates. And if we look at the application one here, this is for your MSI, your application, as opposed to say the system application or the message bus. Inside this massive file is a section for every supported adapter. So this section we're in at the moment is just, here's the endpoint, the FTP received endpoint. And what it does now, if you understand Liquid, is it's executing or iterating over the applications in the model. And if it finds an adapter of type FTP, then it is going to insert this section into the output YAML file. And what it's going to do is it's going to say that, well, the template is called this, plus the application name, plus the endpoint name. It's going to name the resource. So this is the name of the API connection here. So you can see it's got API-C. And then it's got some additional information here, like the environment. So are we in the development environment or are we in the production environment? And then we've got the unique suffix that we supplied there as well. And then parameters here. And so the parameters that we were setting are all coming out of here. Yeah, so username, password, server port, this is all coming from the values that we set in that RP001 rule. Now remember, in a logic app, for something like FTP, the properties we read from the binding file will be in two different resources. We've got the API connection that stores things like the server port and the username and the password, and if it's binary transport. And then we've got the actual logic app and the FTP connector, and that's got things like the folder that we're reading from or the path, plus the polling information. So the binding file information for the receive location is split across two resources. But this is how we find it. So once this is executed, we now have a YAML file that describes the resources we want to create and the parameters we want for those. Then the tool will take that YAML file and use it as input to a series of templates. So what this is saying is that we want to create an FTP connection endpoint. In this case here, this is an API connection, and it tells you where to find the path to it inside here. So it's saying, for example, in this case here, if this is development, the path is going to be endpoints, FTP, receive, and then here API connection.json. And then further down here, we'll find one for the logic app as well. Yeah. So this one here is for the API connection. So it's saying that this is the ARM template we want to use, and then this is the parameter files as well. But these could, you know, they don't have to be ARM templates. This could also be a PowerShell script or something like that that's being run. In fact, we used that. Well, it's being used in various other places as well. So if I now come back out to the AIM Azure repo, this is, once we've got the YAML file generated, then the tool will look through that YAML file, and that YAML file tells it what templates you want to use. So for example, it said we want to use one that is under endpoints, FTP, receive, and it is called the API connection here. So it was looking for this one here, and it was looking for probably the dev one here. And the dev one here is a liquid file again. So it is going to use, you know, sort of execute a liquid runner over this, and it's going to pull the values here. So this, you know, two curly braces here is how you do a lookup, and those values are coming from that YAML file that we just created. So this is the three passes. We create the model, which is a JSON file. From that, we're then generating a YAML file that says this is what we want to create, and these are the parameters. Then we're running liquid. We're finding those templates, and we're taking the values from the YAML file and inserting them into the liquid file here. So the output of this will be a parameter file, and that's what you see on disk. So it's replaced all these values here with what we need. Now the actual API connection isn't a liquid file. It doesn't need to be, because we are supplying everything as parameters. But if, for example, you had a logic app where there was a value you needed to supply from the model or from the YAML file, that would become a liquid file as well, but this isn't. And the tool would recognize it's a liquid file. I'm going to execute a liquid runner over that using the YAML file as well. Alrighty. If we look at what gets generated for all of this, once it's run through this, it then outputs it all, and we go and look in our folders, what we should find, if I go and find where I have put everything in here. So for the FTP scenario, I've got conversion, I've got applications, then I've got my application, endpoints. You'll see that it's following a very similar folder structure as well. So the FTP receiver location, and here we go. So if you remember in our code view here, these are liquid files. Some of them are not, but most of them are liquid files. The parameter ones are at least. And now we've got the finalized versions in our folder here. Okay, they're no longer liquid files. And if I look at that receive connection, the API connection for the receive adapter, and open that up, you'll see now it's put the actual values in here. So it's taken these from that YAML file, and that YAML file has been built from the model, and the model has been built from the binding file. So it runs all the way through to get to here. And now I can do a deployment of that, and when I do a deployment of it and go up into Azure, I'll see that I have, if I come into my FTP resource group, I now have, there's the API connection for my FTP receive connector, and then I've also got the logic app here as well. And if I was to open that up, you'll see it won't show you much, but if I edit, you'll see the values that are in here are actually from the parameter files, although I had to modify the parameter files to work with my FTP connection. But there we go. That's end-to-end how it works. And you can begin to see how you might modify your code or modify it to work with your own situation. So if you want to write a new adapter, it's adding a new rule, and the rule will then add in the properties and everything to the model. And then after you've done that, you then have to edit the YAML file and add a section in for another adapter like SFTP. Yeah, and then you have to also create the actual templates, the Azure templates for whatever the adapter you're creating. So in our case, if it's SFTP, there's going to be an ARM template for it and an API connection and then deployment scripts and things like that as well. But that's how you start adding things to it. That's for example, as an adapter, and maybe in another webinar we'll talk about, well, what if you wanted to do something more interesting, like I want to add support for, say, scatter gather or something. I want to run over that model and I want to optimize it in some way to change what's going to be output at the other end. And that's quite cool how you can do that as well. Alrighty, that's me.
Thanks for that, Dan. That was amazing. So let me just get back to where we were in the presentation. So and then I will share that in here. I am going to get better at trying to multitask. I think I just need another monitor. I've only got 2, and I think for doing webinars on Teams you need 3. So
at a minimum.
that's a minimum, yeah. So so there we go. So what I've got is so for everyone on the webinar, we really just got one question for you. Be really interested to know is, have you downloaded and run the BizTalk Migrator yet? So again, in the Q&A, just give us a yes or a no. That'd be great. Don't be shy. Really, or if you have or you haven't, then it doesn't matter. But I'm just really interested to sort of get a feel for where we are. So that is in the Q&A. Obviously, I've answered some of the Q&A as we've gone along. So so great. Yeah. So thanks a lot for including those questions, and do keep them coming. And so we just got one from Vivek, which is, I received an error when I ran BizTalk Migrator over an MSI. An item with the same key has already been added. Key initializes correlation. Any input on this? That
I speak about that because I've had the same error. But Andrew, you go first.
Okay. I was going to say, my guess would be that there's multiple orchestrations, and more than one orchestration has got a correlation set with the same name. Would that be a good guess?
Yep, perfect. That's exactly right. So we had the same issue when we were running the tool over one of our clients, and when we first ran it, we decided to run all their MSIs through the tool, and we got that error twice. So one interesting thing, Vivek, is that, and maybe this should be better advertised, is if you do hit that error, the tool will stop. But there's a flag that you can run, --no--abort, and I'll put that in when we answer your let's publish your question, and then I'll put that in. You can use --no--abort parameter, and what that will do is it will keep running, so it won't stop, and it will still generate output. But you'll probably find that the orchestration doesn't appear, whatever it was that had that problem, but it will do its best to output what it's got at that point. Because I've had the same issue, I've raised an internal bug with Microsoft. I think all I need to do is actually raise an issue in AIM tool. In fact, if you want to do that, Vivek, that might even be even better. It might get Microsoft to actually do something about it, because when I do it, they're like, oh, it's Dan again. But if you do it, then
stop hassling me,
we
Dan.
should probably fix it. But supply as much detail as you can. But I was basically going to debug through the code, Vivek, and see if I could find what the problem is. But that's exactly right. What Andrew said is, I suspect it's multiple orchestrations using the same correlation set name, and that's causing a problem. There must be some collection in the middle that it's building, and they are not unique, the keys. So I imagine it's a fairly simple fix. And in fact, if I run through and debug the code and find the issue, I might submit a fix for it. But definitely raise an issue if you can. Or you can ping us at the end. I think we've got our email addresses. If you want to ping us an email, if I find out any more information, we can just drop you a line and let you know if there's a fix for it.
Yeah, that's great. We've got so Yeah, great. Thanks for sending that, Vivek. Does anyone else have any more Q&A before we wrap up? I'll give you a couple of seconds, and then we'll just move on. So
one of the things I was thinking, Andrew, is it would be useful to publish. I was just trying to find it. Microsoft have an email address for this tool, and so if you've got requests on features you'd like to see or anything like that, send them an email, because the more people that contact them and saying, you know, we want to see this, or this doesn't work, or, you know, we've got clients that really want to use it, the better, because they will then, you know, it's basically like voting for the tool. So if you want to see something like, you know, I'd love to see WCF support, WCF basic HTTP and web HTTP support, I'd really like to see in the tool. I'd like to see BAM support. I'd like to see, you know, being able to take SSO and stick that in Azure App Config. So if you want to see these things, send them an email, and I'm just see if I can find the address. I know Valerie has it somewhere, Andrew.
yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head.
Okay, give me a second, I'll be able to find it. But give me 1 second, I'll see if I can find it so we can put it on here.
Okay, so what I'll do then is just move on. So we do have another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks, last one of the year, so we can get our you know, tinsel on for that one, and it's going to be Ultimate User Guide. So everything you wanted to know about how to run and use BizTalk Migrator in one place. The Ultimate User Guide is going to be the next webinar in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, anyone, please, if you have any thoughts about things you really want to see, how to do something, you know, how to fix something, how to add something, anything like that, anything you want to know, do drop us a line. So here are our contact details. So yeah, my email is andrew@345.technology, and you can look me up on LinkedIn there. You know, just LinkedIn Andrew Rivers, and then or Dan. So dan.probert@afternoons.com, or Probert Daniel on LinkedIn. So do yeah, do let us know, because we want to make sure that this is as relevant as possible for you. So please, if there's anything you really want to know, then do shout out, because we're more than happy to go and give you the the information that's relevant to you. So we can guess, but it'd be much easier if you told us. So yeah, by all means get in touch, and we'll see you next time. So obviously,
Thanks, I found the email address, by the way.
Okay. Do you want to put it in the chat, or do you want to?
Yeah, I'll drop it in the chat as an announcement. BizTalkMigration@Microsoft.com. So if you've got, if basically, if you want a new feature or something like that, and you want to vote on it, that's what you should be doing, putting it there. So give me a second, and I will do it as an announcement. So it would be BizTalk Migration at Microsoft. Won't get support through it, but it goes to the internal team. Email to use to request features. Okay. So BizTalk Migration at Microsoft.com. So yeah, that's if you've got a feature or something you want to see, put it on there. You can also raise an issue in the AIM tool repo as well. But if you've got general questions, yeah, contact Andrew or myself.
So on that note, I think we are pretty much bang on for the hour. So thanks a lot for joining us, and we will see you next time. So thanks a lot to Dan for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much. Cheers, Andrew.
All right. Bye now.